So this is more of an extension on the lightning talk I gave. The lightning talk I gave was kind of touching on a little bit of form objects, just in a theoretical sense, and how you can use form objects in a multi-step process, like multi-step user sign-up, and with user metrics to kind of gain insight to your user analytics to make some business decisions. It was only a 10-minute talk, so I had to rush pretty quickly through it, and I really didn't touch on any code. So I know this is more of a beginner slot, but this is actually fairly code heavy. I'm going to try to do my best to explain all of it. If you don't understand something, please stop me and ask more questions, because I'll probably finish early like I normally do. All right, so why are form objects a good idea? It's kind of a new idea in the Rails community, using service objects and form objects. Maybe it's not new, but it's starting to get some momentum. So the whole app directory is starting to get kind of flooded with form directories or the concerns directories. But it's a good thing. Let's just dump it all in there and let's figure it out later. So with form objects, it's essentially a basic Ruby class. You kind of introduce the idea of validation or talking to other database objects, but it really kind of simplifies the idea or gives a name to a process. A form is a process. If you give it a name and you treat it like such, it's going to make your application a lot easier to use, understand, and maintain. Maintain is the important word. All right, so some of the problems I have with the current active record, form setup currently is the first one is mass assignment. GitHub got bit pretty bad early on. One of my applications got bit. I don't know if anyone else here has experienced that. But the whole idea with mass assignment is you do user.create and you pass in the params hash. And well, that's totally over user input. And you can get kind of screwed from that. And maybe someone finds a little backdoor to get in your application and change some stuff. Whereas where GitHub was, someone actually made themselves a repo admin and changed some stuff. Model complexity. So you have a lot of stuff that goes in the model. Defies is a great example. It does everything. So in using the current, the default Rails way of doing stuff, that becomes really simple and really kind of just default and easy to do. So I recommend getting away from it. Validation context. This is probably the most important for me. When I say validation context, when you have a user sign up, that means validation does one thing in that context. If it's on your admin side, whether it's active admin or something that you built yourself, that's a whole separate context. And then if you're on the console, that's a whole different thing. I just saw Judd run it today. He wanted to update. He added a validation, didn't think about it. It broke a whole section of the app, which he's totally embarrassed about. But it's all about context. If you can move this context around where it matters, things become a lot simpler. In complicated testing, again, with devise, you have an object doing way too much. You don't know what to stub, what to ignore. It becomes just hard to do. All right, so the example I kind of want to use, just keep this in the back of your mind as an image. This is CodeBiz's website. This is done by Judd. I'm hoping he takes something away from this presentation and changes it. So it's a really simple form.
6 hours.
I know. But it's a really simple form. It's got 3 fields. So I'm going to go really basic, and I'm going to try to make this a little more complicated. So CodeBiz is a co-working spot. If you go to the website, you can sign up to get a free day pass. It emails you, and you bring that in and work for free. So it asks for first name, last name, email, and there's a submit button. Really simple. So what tools do we need to start using to make this whole thing work?
That's not a multi-step form, is it?
I'm going to make it a multi-step.
Why?
Maybe he'll tell you that.
It's contrived. We should
Oh,
just go with
is it really? Throw me under the bus. Go ahead.
Okay, so the tools that you're going to use to kind of set up form objects, a multi-step process, and track what your users are doing are going to be these. Datamapify will handle the form objects. Form objects themselves kind of have a whole general idea around them. Wicked is a gem that handles multi-step forms, and there's mixed panel. As I go through this, I'll tell you what I like and don't like about all of these. So let's just start with the simple model. And when I say simple, that's it. This is after I've done this is the way I like to keep them. They just stay that way. They're really simple, easy to understand. Maybe also associations. Maybe some associations. Okay, yeah, realistic. You'll add some associations. You'll do some scopes, but try not to go outside of that. Try to just name the process that you're working on. if you can come up with a name and classify and put its own class, it just makes it easier. But try and keep it this way if you can. Anyway, so no validations, no business logic. One thing that all that does is it's really easy to test this. And that's nice. All right, so active record, treated that way. It's a database wrapper. It's really good at that. It can talk to all sorts of databases. You probably shouldn't be using one. It talks to all sorts of databases. It builds, really great SQL queries. If you use it right, you don't hit performance issues. That's what it's great at. But it's not a landfill. So don't add all sorts of crap to it. And trust me, we're all guilty of it. I'm definitely guilty of it. 1,200 line user models with everything under the sun, and you just can't maintain that. So where does all this logic go? Well, it goes here. So this is a form object, essentially. So this might look a little bit complicated, but probably looks familiar. So start at the top. So this is using the data mapify gem. So you just include it with data mapify entity. Now, before I go too much further, data mapify has a lot of features. If you look at the documentation, it's super confusing. Ignore it. Just use this. All you need is the attributes and the validates. And my problem with data mapify is its complexity. Data mapify can probably be simplified way down, and I would like to do so in the future. So it just includes these 2 bits. But the 2 bits that are important are the attributes. So this looks like a Mongo record. So you tell it the attribute, and you'll see first name, last name, email. Those come from the form that we're using. And you tell it the type. That can be any sort of Ruby primitive, string, integer, fixum, all that kind of stuff, or even like date time. So you define those there, and then you define your validations. So those come from active model, or is it active model? Yeah. And so same thing. I want to make sure that they put the first name, last name, email in. One thing that you do lose when you move outside of the active record validations directly in an active record class is you don't have access to validates, email uniqueness is true. So you kind of have to build that on your own, but you can see here at the bottom it's not super hard. So that's really the only validation that you tend to lose. Am I wrong about that? Okay.
Well, there are a couple others you might want to care about if you try and do fancy stuff, but.
And what if you want to scope it to another model?
Right, but you can do that.
You can still do that. Yeah, you can still do it as long as you bring yourself access to it. But you can do that. Anyway, that's the big one that you lose that you probably run into right away.
Yeah.
But it's just a quick call, no big deal. It's done. So those are the bits that, at least that top bit, that's data mapify. So that gives you the big base that you need to make Rails happy when you're calling, form 4, because data mapify does some other stuff behind the scenes that you don't know about. But if you just include that, it'll just work, which is nice. So then I add a simple save method to my form object. I just do a quick guard at the top, return false unless the object is valid. That runs the validations up here. Feels like a Rails model at that point. Then the block down below, I typically like to put this in another class, but to keep things simple on the slide, I just put it in line here. So I just build out the user, and I build it out very specifically. I get very verbose in here. I could do a hash, I could do something else, but I want to be very specific because I like having that verbosity in this context. And as you see, I'm not doing any mass assignment. I'm specifically assigning everything. So I don't have to worry about Rails 3's mass adder accessible. I don't have to worry about Rails 4's strong params. To be honest with you, I don't even know how to use strong params. I don't care. I don't want to use it. I like this better. I think it should be rolled out, honestly. But anyway, okay. So that's a basic form object. So what does the controller look like? When I've talked to people about this before, this is kind of the pain point they feel. They're like, okay, I kind of get your form object. What's the controller look like? It's not that complicated. You just create a form at the top in your new, and then in the create, the post, let's create the form, pass in the params that come from the form, save it, and do the same thing you do with the Rails object. It's actually really simple. But this seems to trip people up from what I can tell. But that's it. That's your basic controller. It looks like a Rails controller, because it is. So what's the form look like? Again, very simple. Input the first name, last name, email. This is simple form, but it can be form 4. Looks fairly the same. The only thing to note here that changes is the URL. So with form 4, you could just pass the form, and with some Rails magic, it can figure out its own, or you can pass it, another path. You kind of have to tell it exactly where it wants to go. because it's not a Rails active record class, Rails doesn't know how to introspect it to figure out where it's supposed to go. So you have to just help it along and tell it where to go. And that's typically just going to be the main path for the object. I get it, Everyone got it so far?
You're doing great, man.
All right, let's make this more complicated. So it's multiple steps. So the reason for my lightning talk originally was to talk about user metrics and how it's helped my startup. And the one thing I really learned right up front is if you have a single step for your application, you have nothing to measure. Everyone talks about A/B testing and figure out what your user is doing. If you have a single step, and you will never know unless you can actually break down your goals. So if your goal is to have a user come to your site and buy the new TV, well, if you're only tracking, like, do they come to my site, buy TV, yes or no? Well, that you can't tweak anything. But if you can say, okay, do they come to my site? Do they at least click on a categories path? Do they do a search, or do they filter something down? Try to figure out where they're going and see how you can improve and push them in the right direction. So with multiple steps, in the form context, this really helps and gives you the opportunity to do so. All right, so this gets nasty. All right, so this introduces 2 steps. It's only 2 steps. But I'm going to break this down a little bit further so you can see it. So this is the full controller. I'm going to talk about the show step first. So this introduces the wicked jump. So wicked takes care of multiple steps in a single controller. I don't really like it, but it works. So I've been using it. So what wicked tries to do is it tries to introduce a RESTful multi-step process into your controller. So you include the wicked gem at the top with the wizard, and then you tell the steps in your controller. So you just pass it, a list of strings or symbols. And then in your show, which would be, the new form deal, you tell it, okay, run a case statement on the step, and then catch for the first step, and then do whatever you need to do. And the same thing for the other step. And then at the bottom, you run into the wizard. And that will just automatically call the right file. And it does a lot of magic behind the scenes. Again, another reason I don't like it, but again, it works. So it's simple though. The contact information form, we're doing the same thing. I just say build a new, create a password. In the preferences form, I just say preferences form. I'll show you how it looks a little later. But one thing to know is how you can start to link in the multiple step thing, the multiple step forms. If you're not fully comfortable with Ruby classes and how to build those on your own whenever you need them, you might want to look into that a little bit more to make it all a little bit more sense. But essentially, I can just tell the current customer belongs, form.customer equals current customer, and then in that form object, I can build how I need it. It's going to make more sense a little bit later.
Where did current customer come from?
I'm assuming using device is why.
Oh my God.
There'd be a lot more code if I had to build some of this stuff.
Assume it's a helper in his application.
Yes, it just calls customer.log. All right, so in the update, the update looks the same. So this would be the post. Again, it's a case statement. I'm checking for the first step, and I'm checking for the second step. Then I call the run wizard. So it looks exactly the same on the first step. Create the new form, pass it to params, and save it. On the second step, I create the new form. I assign the customer and save it. And then I run the wizard. Now, just remember that I'm assigning success at the top there. So what I'm looking for is a true or false value. Just remember that because that's not the default wicked. And at the bottom, there's a finish wizard path. If you just add that method for wicked, it will automatically redirect once they're done. So at the top here, when I say success and I call run a wizard, there's a hack you have to add to wizard. I'm just adding this for just so it can be on the slides and people get it later. I had to override rendered wizard in wicked in order to just expect a true or false value and then move on. By default, rendered wizard will actually save your object and then do stuff. And I think that's a really bad practice. So I quickly ran into a problem, and so if I look for a true or false value, I can just move along the steps as I want, and then control the saving of objects as I need. So we saw the preferences form. This is the preferences form. Looks a lot like the other one, but this one's a little bit simpler. So you saw I could do form.customer equals current customer. So I just add an adder accessor customer, so I can have access to that. And then I have two values in this one. Again, very contrived, but I have a desk type and hours. So they could just be a text field and people put in information. So they would do the first step and then they come to this next step, tell me what desk type they want and what hours they might be interested in. Then I just validate those, and in my save, I have the guard, and then in my customer, I'm able to assign the values that I want, and then save the object. So again, not super complicated. If you have multiple steps, that form would get a little bit longer. In my code, I tend to break out even all those stuff like in the case statement. I'll break that down into smaller methods or maybe even bigger class files on my phone. Again, just to make it easier to test. So what's it all doing? So if you're going to be doing multiple steps, I find it really important that you use something like mixed panel. You can use KISS metrics. Don't use Google Analytics. It doesn't work for this. It's just do the way they store the data and how you have to query the data. It's not helpful. And mixed panel is super easy to use. They have a free account for a certain number of hits, and just sign up for it. But, yeah, it's right now. So this is an example of how to use it. You just pull in the mixed panel gem, mixed panel tracker.new, pass in your token that you get on your settings, and pass it anything you want. So if you call track and you can just give it a string, it can be anything, and then you can pass it some data. The data in this one is using a special variable. If you do $email, I think they also have $first name, last name, stuff like that. Kind of basic, sort of data. You kind of filter a little bit better in mixed panel, but it can be any string that you pass in there. It could be desk type. That's what I'm trying to say. So example of using it inside that form. So on the first step, after they're done after they're done with the first step, I just call the tracker, tell them that they're done with tell mixed panel that it's done with the first step. It belongs to this email address for the customer. After the second step, do the same thing, but at the bottom, I'm passing in the desk type and the hours. Now, you don't have to do that. You can pass anything you want. But when you're kind of looking at mixed panel and want to correlate data and see where people are coming from, you can filter on this data that you're passing in. You can search on that data as well. So it becomes important to maybe all the people, like you want to do from refer, all the people from Google for some reason want hours from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. I don't know if that helps your business at all, but it could. There's a screenshot of mixed panels. That's bigger reason that you should use it. With the steps, you can create funnels inside of mixed panel. With the funnels, you can create charts like this. So for this one, for instance, this is for my old lightning talk. I have 4 steps that they have to go through. In the funnel, you say they have to complete this step, this step, this step, this step, and you can kind of get a breakdown of what's going on. And this is very important. This is what's been driving my business for a while now. Just trying to make those numbers at each point go up. So the lessons I've learned with this, as a developer, it's always been kind of like, let's just make the app work. As long as it works well, it's going to be great. As what I hate to say it, as a marketer now, Jeff loves that. As a marketer now,
Become the guy he hates to.
making the app work doesn't work. You have to measure it. You have to figure out what people are doing on it. You have to figure out and change it on the fly to make it work better for your customer. Without doing that, it's just an app that works and it's not making money. Multiple steps give you the opportunity to measure the user that. Just measure everything you can. If you think you need it, just put it in there. Even if you don't think you need it, just put it in there. You can always take it out later if it doesn't mean anything down the road. But let the data show that to you, because you'd be surprised. Like, okay, I'll explain the story again with my business. I didn't think that most of my customers would be under 18. So on my last step, I tracked a link click to say something. Let me back up. I didn't think they'd be under 18. So through the process, I noticed a lot of them were dropping off at the end. So correlating the data that they were dropping off to the age field that I was passing the mixed panel, I could see the average age of all the users. And they were under 18. So on the last step of the form, I added a link to say, need your parents' permission. And by adding that, I've gotten a lot of customers by doing that. Because they talk to the parents, they think parents can email, blah, blah, blah. So that was something I wouldn't be able to figure out without the data. It seems like a really stupid feature to add, but it actually worked. Okay, so let the metrics start your business.
So I have a comment, but remember how that first step makes it so easy for you to get their contact information and follow up with them automatically?
You want to explain your code over here?
No.
Okay.
I'm talking about for phone case.
I was talking about for anything.
Yeah.
No, hold on. So I want to kind of talk about landing pages in this, but I thought that'd be really boring, but I got time. Okay, so on the metric side, and how to talk to your user base. If someone hits your website and you have no way for them to fill out anything or enticing them to fill out anything, they're gone. You'll never see them again. You'll never be able to talk to them again because you don't have their number or their email address. CoBiz was kind of very stagnant. The website wasn't getting any sort of hits, the location wasn't getting any sort of interest. But Joe decided to change the website and he threw this on there. And
we had a bet. No, we had a bet with how soon the first person would use it, and I was like, "What's the over/under?" And you think you gave me 6 weeks?
I gave you 6 weeks. It was
like that day.
2 hours. It was in 2 hours, and you filled this out and said, "Give me 3 hours."
And I rubbed it in his face, and he would be
there was a whole business built on this idea. Mantra. I'm sure you've all heard of it. They host every landing page in the world now. But it's built on that pure idea. Just have someone come to your site and give you your email address. You'd be surprised how many people will give it to. And you can contact them again. At some point, they were a little bit interested in what you're selling or what you're talking about. And maybe you won't be able to capture in the future, but you can at least try. And I don't feel so bad now trying to talk to someone over email if they showed me interest at one point. And so just having this on there, just some sort of quick way to get their information. So like on phone case, the first step looks very much like this, but I have just a full name and an email address. So once I have that, I can go ahead and start putting them in my marketing churn and see if I can't get some interest that way and offer coupon codes and stuff like that.
Which has been very successful.
Yeah, and then
And
track
that
that
was
stuff.
my idea.
You track, who's doing this, who you're sending it to, how many people converted on that, can you change the language? Again, it's just about your application's doing a lot. You can track a lot. You just have to think about tracking it. And once you track it, you find some interesting points.
So I have a question. In Europe, in phone cases where you're doing this, are you sort of synchronously sending the tracker data that's coming in? Like, do you have to
Actually, currently, I'm doing JavaScript.
Okay. So you're sending.
I'm still trying to figure out which side I want it on.
Right.
I think I'll probably stick with JavaScript, but this is all in Ruby, so I just.
Yeah. Well, no, the JavaScript side sort of, if you don't need to correlate it with data that you got in the database before you actually send it, then you're better off looking at the JavaScript because that saves you from doing it synchronously.
Yeah. And that's the other thing about Mixpanel, if you don't know, it does Ruby, PHP, probably does, I know it does iOS, it probably does Scala or something, I don't know. It does a lot, which is really cool. Actually, no, it's just a curl API, or a REST API, so you can do it with anything. So if you've got something out there that you want to track, it's pretty cool. Yeah.
This is kind of related, but how do you feel about duplicate form fields, like from your email address, this type of thing?
What do you mean?
Like, confirm your password.
It took a take one.
Okay.
I'm trying, like I said last time, I'm trying to figure out how to remove my password field off of my sign-up process. And by getting rid of buys, I can do that.
Okay.
You can do that.
You didn't really talk about the actual HTML stuff much, but what about the back button? Can you say anything about the back button?
Okay, yeah, that's introduced some really interesting problems for me.
That's a nightmare.
And a lot of bugs.
Yeah.
Originally when I did
That
this,
was
you have to really, so I use a state machine on all my stuff, and
Was your thing a state machine or no?
no, it's
Yeah,
not.
well, actually,
Well,
is.
it is, and it's internally, it doesn't track that somehow. But for my main objects, I keep it tracked in the state machine, and I just throw something that's saying this is the object that they're currently working on, and because on my first step, I create the customer, and then they move on to a whole other step of objects.
So are you gradually building up the actual objects that are going to be used during the form, or are you building up some temporary things that are going to get copied over?
I build up the actual objects. By using a state machine, I, in theory, should know what state they're in, so I know how to not act on them later on.
or another way of saying it is you should always know the last state they completed.
Yes.
So you know what the next state should be, that they should be doing.
Yeah. Speaking of state machines, have you used Statesman?
I'm not a state.
I like it.
You like it?
It's,
I'll look at it.
there's one problem with it, but I like it.
For those that are wondering what we're talking about, there is a topic suggestion on state machines in Ruby, which I am happy to present on, but it needs more votes.
Why do you need the extrinsic motivation to vote?
Yeah.
Yeah, questions?
That was awesome.
Thank you.
Really good.